Hello, everyone. Good morning from Vienna, and good afternoon or good evening for those joining from different locations around the world. Welcome to the today webinar on radiation protection in medical uses of ionizing radiation, organized by the Radiation Protection of Patients Unit of the International Atomic Energy Agency. My name is Jenia Vassileva. I'm radiation protection specialist working with the Radiation Protection of Patients Unit of the IAEA, and I'll be the moderator of this webinar. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the question and answer period at the end of the session. We'll welcome your questions and comments during the whole session, but we'll answer them at the end after the presentations. The microphones and cameras for participants are disabled during the entire webinar. You can still participate actively by writing your questions or comments at any time during and after the presentation in the Q&A box that is located on your screen, depending on the device you are using, either on the right hand side. You can activate it from the bar on the bottom with 3 dots. Or if you are using a mobile device, you can also find this screen Q&A box and enter your questions. Please note that the IAEA is not offering certification for its webinars. The webinar today is the first in the series that we are starting now. To present the experience of different countries for using electronic tools for patient dose data reporting, patient dose data monitoring. And today we will start with the experience of Australia, Sweden, and Indonesia. International basic safety standards require that protection and safety is optimized for each medical exposure of patients. For each purpose, several components need to be in place, and diagnostic reference levels and periodic audits of patient doses to compare to DRLs are identified as important tools for optimization of patient protection. As defined in the DRL, in the BSS, diagnostic reference level is a level used in medical imaging to indicate whether in routine conditions, the dose to the patient or the amount of radiopharmaceuticals administered in a specified radiological procedure for medical imaging is unusually high or unusually low for that procedure. The ISRP in the publication 135 provides a detailed guidelines on establishing and using diagnostic reference levels, diagnostic DRL cycle for the purposes of optimization, including periodic updates of DRLs. The responsibility, according to the agency safety standards for establishing DRL and for their updates are to the government, and here the consultation is encouraged between the health authority, relevant professional bodies, and the regulatory body. And for the periodic dose assessment and reviews at local level, at the hospital level, the responsibility is to the registrants and licenses, but the real work is done by teams of medical physicists, radiographers, and radiologists. With this, of course, it's time to focus on the topic of the today webinar, because data collection for establishing DRLs, their updates, is quite a challenging task. And for this purpose, different automatic systems help the process. Today, we will start with the online dose data reporting established at national level. And in this, Australia is one of the pioneers, and we will start with the presentation from Australia. And this will be presented by Dr. Peter Thomas, who is presently the director of the medical imaging section at the Australian Radiation Protection Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA. The section runs the Australian National DRL service, provides educational material and advice, contributes to codes and safety guides, and promotes optimal use of medical radiation. Dr. Thomas has served as the chair of the ANSCIAR expert group on medical exposure since 2019 and contributed to the most recent ANSCIAR report summarizing the present global level of ionizing radiation exposure in medicine. Next, we'll listen to the experience of Sweden, and this will be presented by Dr. Anja Almén. Anja Almén is a senior specialist at Swedish Radiation Safety Authority, SSM, with the responsibility to develop and promote radiological protection in medicine. Her work also includes the responsibility of the national framework for DRLs. She lectures in different national settings and has been involved in training missions of the IAEA and in international projects. She is appointed associate professor at Lund University. Dr. Almén has carried out work as a medical physics expert and radiation protection expert in healthcare at all levels. She has been a member of IAEA Radiation Safety Standards Committee and currently represents Sweden in the Nordic Working Group on Medical Exposure and the HERCA Working Group on Medical Applications, and she is one of the Swedish representatives at ANSCIAR. Then we'll listen to the experience of Indonesia presented by Ms. Taruniyati Handayani. She works for BAPETEN, the nuclear regulatory body of Indonesia, since 1998. She's the head of the Regulatory Assessment Center for Radiation Facilities. This center functions as the internal technical support organization to the main regulatory function, such as regulation development, license insurance, and inspection conduct. Since 2006, the center has been responsible for developing a system to collect the radiation dose data of patients, which finally led to the establishment of an online registry system, namely CINTAN, or Information System for Patients' Dose Data. So we look forward to learning from the experience of these three countries from three different places in the world. And before I hand over to the first speaker, I would like to ask my colleague Margarita to display a question. We want to learn from you. From which institution, which profession do you come from? Because attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, but it's good to learn who is in the audience. So please answer the question on the right-hand side. What is your occupation? We have two choices between the regulator, medical physicist, radiographer, technologist, or other. Just few options. So if the polling window is not open, you can find it and click on polling and answer the question. Margarita, can you please display the result? Yeah. Can you display the result? I don't see it. I see that the poll has ended. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So we have, of course, not everyone was able to answer it in this short time, but we have a mixed audience, and it's good to see that we have regulators, we have medical physicists as expected, because they have the main responsibility at hospital level, and we also have radiographers and probably colleagues coming from other institutions or maybe radiologists or physicians. Thank you very much. So with this introduction, and without any further delay, I want to hand over to Dr. Peter Thomas for the first part of the presentation. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jenia. Can you just give me a thumbs up? Is my sound level okay? Good, thanks, Rooney. Okay, so I'm here to talk about Australia's experience with online dose data reporting for establishing and using diagnostic reference levels. And I guess the main aspect of that is our Australian, the ARPANSA National Diagnostic Reference Level Service, which aims to provide imaging facilities with a tool to record protocol dose information and get a comparison with the national DRLs, but then also as a point of collection of all of that data, which we can then use to review and update the DRLs. And that gives us data like this, where we have a time series of the data that's been collected, and we can monitor how that's tracking over time. Now, I did just want to take a slight step back and say, why are we doing this in the first place? Jenia already talked through the BSS. Just putting a brief UNSCIA hat on. So the most recent UNSCIA medical exposure assessment was approved at the UNSCIA meeting at the end of last year, and the report is not out yet, but the report will hopefully be appearing later this year. There's a short summary in the report to the General Assembly, but the basic points are that medical exposures are the largest human-made source of ionising radiation exposure to the world population. The estimate of the annual collective effective dose is 4.15 million person-sieverts, with an uncertainty of about 30%, and that doesn't include doses from radionuclide therapy or radiation therapy. And the contribution of that from computed tomography in the current assessment is put at 62%, which is up from the 37% at the previous assessment. But of course, it varies a lot between countries depending on the level of advancement of their healthcare system, and not only between countries, but even within countries. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it does highlight the fact that that this is a considerable source of exposure, and therefore we want to minimise any unnecessary radiation that patients would be receiving. And then, of course, we have the bond call for action. Action 2 talks about enhancing the implementation of the principle of optimisation, and part of that is using diagnostic reference levels as tools for optimisation to give an indication to facilities how they do compare with their peers, and to be able to take action when they see that they're at the upper end. So how do we go about collecting and managing this data? Well, so there are a range of tools that could be used at a local facility level in an individual hospital or clinic. And I've got some examples here of vendor tools, or one could use a spreadsheet, such as is sitting in the background there. This webinar, though, is not looking at what's happening at the local level, but rather what happens at the national level. So at the national level, we do have examples of highly automated systems. And so I've got the example on the right here of the American College of Radiology's dose index registry, where data is being harvested pretty much directly from the modality to an intermediate server, and then being fed through to the centralised database without much other interaction happening. Some software vendors will also allow what I might call a nationwide PACS, where images and dose data from hospital picture archiving and communication systems can be collected together and stored at a national level. But often there's considerable cost considerations involved with that, and setting up and managing of it. But it does give the advantage that one has all the data. But what we're going to talk about today are what I've called tailored local solutions, which are usually a lower initial cost, but typically involve manual entry processes. So there, I guess, there are pluses and minuses to some of that. So for now, just a little bit about the situation in Australia. So in Australia, we have a kind of mix of government and private funding of medical procedures, including imaging. So we have public hospitals, which are government funded, which would have imaging departments. We also have privately run hospitals, but what we have is a lot of imaging clinics, which are spread around the country,